Forgotten Garden Traditions, 16 Vintage Features, America Left Behind. Hello friends and welcome back to Earthly Delights. If you've ever looked out at your backyard or tended to the pots on your windowsill and felt that whisper of connection, the quiet joy of seeing life push through soil, you're in the right place. I know many of you watching are home gardeners, houseplant lovers, or simply people craving a touch of green in an otherwise busy digital life. Some of you grow to save money, some for health and peace of mind, and others because gardening is the one place where stress seems to dissolve. But here's the truth. Much of what once shaped American backyards has been forgotten. We've traded living grape arbors for plastic patios, fragrant herb bundles for store-bought jars, and playful bean teepees for metal swing sets. Along the way, entire traditions, rich with wisdom, patience, and creativity, have slipped through our fingers. In today's journey, we're going to uncover those lost garden treasures. 16 vintage features that once defined how families grew, cooked, and lived with plants. And who knows, maybe you'll discover an idea worth reviving in your own garden. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's step back in time together. And before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community here on Earthly Delights, where your passion for plants finds its home. 1. The Living Bean Teepee, a garden playground full of magic. Imagine being a child again, stepping barefoot into the garden on a warm summer morning. Instead of running to a plastic slide or a metal swing set, you find something far more magical. A secret hideaway built from nothing more than poles and seeds. The bean teepee was once a beloved feature in American backyards, a structure that grew taller every day, alive with green walls and dappled sunlight. Parents would tie 6 or 8 long poles together at the farm, then let children press beans into the soil at the base. Within weeks, vines would begin their climb, heart-shaped leaves weaving into living walls that offered both shade and wonder. By July, it wasn't just a garden structure, it was a world of its own, buzzing with bees, cooled by leafy ceilings, and heavy with dangling pods ready to pick. Children read books inside, played hide and seek, or simply lay still, listening to the rustle of leaves above. And when autumn arrived, the teepee melted back into the earth, leaving behind only memories. For today's gardener, this forgotten tradition isn't just about nostalgia. It's about teaching kids that gardens can be both playful and nourishing, spaces where food and imagination grow hand in hand. 2. Victory gardens, when growing food was a symbol of hope. As we move from playful bean teepees into the wider world of community and survival, we arrive at one of the most powerful garden traditions ever seen in America, the Victory Garden. Picture this: during World War II, millions of families transformed their backyards, rooftops, even schoolyards into plots bursting with potatoes, beans, and cabbage. These gardens weren't hobbies, they were lifelines. With ration books stretched thin and shelves often bare, people grew their own food not just to feed their families, but as a patriotic act of resilience. Children learned to compost, neighbors swapped seeds and recipes, and evenings were filled with canning jars bubbling on the stove, preserving the taste of summer for the cold months ahead. Even the White House joined in, with Eleanor Roosevelt planting a victory garden to inspire the nation. Imagine what it must have felt like to step outside and know that every sprout, every tomato, every ear of corn was part of something bigger, part of a movement that brought people together in a time of uncertainty. And perhaps, in today's world of rising costs and constant change, the spirit of the Victory Garden whispers to us again, reminding us that our gardens can be more than personal. They can be acts of hope, unity, and quiet strength. Try it. Rhubarb patches, resilient plants and family traditions. From the collective strength of Victory Gardens, let's step into something quieter, tucked away in the corners of old backyards. Rhubarb patches. They weren't glamorous, and they rarely took center stage. Yet for generations, they symbolized endurance and reliability. Families often planted rhubarb along fences or behind sheds, places where little else seemed to thrive. And still, year after year, those red and green stalks pushed through the soil like old friends returning each spring. Children were sent out with knives or scissors, their arms filled with bundles destined for pizzas, whams, and sauces that carried a flavor no store-bought fruit could match. Tart, tangy, and unforgettable. More than food, rhubarb was tradition. Recipes passed from grandmother to mother, and then to child, turned these rugged stalks into memories woven into family life. Today, in a world where so many plants are grown for appearance or convenience, rhubarb reminds us of the beauty of resilience, the kind of plant that thrives without fuss, giving generously despite neglect. It whispers a lesson for modern gardeners too. Sometimes the greatest rewards come not from the flashiest or trendiest plants, but from those steady companions that endure through the years, offering both sustenance and a taste of the past. Cold frames harnessing sunlight to outwit the seasons. After the rugged resilience of rhubarb, let's move toward a tradition that showed just how clever gardeners could be: cold frames. At first glance, they looked humble. Nothing more than wooden boxes with old windows or car windshields laid on top. Yet beneath that simple design was pure magic. Positioned against the sunniest wall, these low structures captured daylight and warmth, turning frosty spring mornings into a sanctuary where lettuce, spinach, and radishes thrived even as snow still lingered outside. Imagine stepping into your yard in February, lifting the glass lid, and seeing green shoots alive and well, while the world around lay frozen. For families in decades past, this wasn't about novelty. It was survival, stretching the harvest from early spring deep into December without a single plug or machine. It was the art of using what was at hand: scrap wood, salvaged glass, patience, and turning it into abundance. And while modern gardeners often dream of high-tech greenhouses, perhaps cold frames hold the wiser lesson that sometimes the simplest tools, guided by knowledge and care, can be just as powerful. It's a reminder that gardening is as much about ingenuity as it is about growth. 5. Grape arbors, green corridors of shade and legacy. From the quiet ingenuity of cold frames, we now step into something far more enchanting: grape arbors. Imagine walking through your backyard in late summer, sunlight filtering through clusters of ripening grapes, their fragrance filling the air while wooden beams above are wrapped in a living canopy. For generations, grape arbors were more than just structures. They were living hallways, places where families gathered to talk, children played beneath the vines, and meals ended with sweet fruit picked straight from the arbor. Concord grapes became jellies, wine grapes turned into homemade batches for celebrations, and raisins dried on screens in the sun. What made these arbors remarkable was not just their bounty, but their patience. Vines often took years to mature, yet once established, they could bear fruit for decades, sometimes even a century. Planting one wasn't just about food or shade, it was a declaration of faith in the future, a gift for children and grandchildren to enjoy. Today, when so much of gardening is about speed and instant results, grape arbors remind us of the beauty of slow growth, of investing in something that outlives us, leaving behind both nourishment and memory. 6. Companion planting, secret friendships beneath the soil. Leaving the graceful shade of grape arbors, we step into a tradition that worked not above our heads, but quietly beneath our feet: companion planting. Long before science could explain it, gardeners knew that some plants simply grew better together, forming natural alliances that made the whole garden stronger. The most famous story is that of the three sisters. Corn standing tall to provide a ladder for beans, beans feeding the soil with nitrogen to nourish the corn, and squash sprawling wide to shade the ground, holding in precious moisture while crowding out weeds. But it didn't stop there. Marigolds released their pungent perfume to confuse pests. Basil kept hornworms away from tomatoes, and nasturtiums sacrificed their blooms to draw aphids away from tender crops. These weren't random plantings. They were acts of wisdom, passed down like folklore, tested in real soil, season after season. And today, as we relearn the science behind root communication and chemical signals, it's clear those old gardeners knew something we're only beginning to prove. Companion planting isn't just efficient. It's a reminder that even in the garden, survival often depends on community, cooperation, and unseen bonds. 7. the root cellar, nature's underground refrigerator. From the harmony of plants working together above ground, let's descend into the earth itself, where another forgotten treasure once safeguarded entire harvests. The root cellar. Built into hillsides or dug beneath backyards, these cool, damp chambers were the original refrigerators, powered not by electricity, but by stone, soil, and a deep understanding of nature's rhythms. Step inside one, and you'd find shelves lined with onions, bins filled with carrots packed in sand, crates of apples resting carefully apart so their gases wouldn't spoil the others, and crocks of pickles or sauerkraut quietly fermenting in the dark. The air stayed steady, hovering just above freezing, with humidity high enough to keep vegetables crisp for months on end. Families relied on this hidden storage to carry them through long winters, a kind of underground pantry that represented both foresight and survival. Today, in our world of humming refrigerators and supermarkets open year-round, it's easy to forget how vital these spaces once were. Yet as more gardeners search for sustainable ways to live, the root cellar offers not just nostalgia, but inspiration. Proof that with patience and clever design, the earth itself can preserve what we grow. 8. Asparagus beds, planting for the future, not just today. From the cool depths of the root cellar, we return to the garden beds above, where one of the most patient traditions took root: asparagus. Unlike quick crops that reward you within weeks, asparagus demanded years of waiting, and yet, once established, it gave back for decades. Gardeners used to say, "Plant asparagus for your children," and they meant it literally. In the first year, there was nothing. The second, perhaps a few thin spears. But by the third year, the real miracle began. Tender shoots rising faithfully each spring, offering harvests that could last for 30 years or more. Families treated their asparagus patches as sacred ground, enriching the soil with manure, spacing crowns carefully, and then leaving them undisturbed. Some of these beds became family landmarks, still sprouting long after the original gardener was gone, a living legacy passed down through generations. In today's fast-paced world, where everything is expected instantly, asparagus offers us a humbling reminder. Not all rewards come quickly, but the ones that do endure are often the sweetest. It's a lesson in patience, legacy, and the quiet promise that what we plant today can nourish lives long into the future. All this ancient clay pots that save water from the long patience of asparagus beds, we turn to a tradition that blended ancient wisdom with everyday necessity, the use of ollas. At first glance, they were nothing more than simple, unglazed clay pots buried halfway in the soil beside crops. But their genius lay in how they released water. Once filled, the porous walls would slowly sweat moisture into the earth, giving plants exactly what they needed, only when they needed it. No hoses, no timers, no waste, just silent efficiency that could cut water use by more than half. Archaeologists have uncovered ollas thousands of years old, used by Native American farmers in the Southwest and in faraway China, proof that this was not a fad but timeless technology. Imagine tending your garden in the heat of summer and knowing that underground, a hidden reservoir was quietly keeping roots alive. In an age where droughts and water shortages challenge us more than ever, perhaps it's time to revive this simple brilliance. The olla reminds us that solutions don't always require gadgets or apps. Sometimes the answers lie in rediscovering what our ancestors already knew, in trusting the quiet wisdom of clay and earth. 10. Cloches, tiny greenhouses for tender plants. Flowing from the ancient wisdom of ollas, we come to a tradition that sparkled above the soil rather than hiding beneath it. Cloches. Picture a garden dotted with glass domes, each one glistening in the sunlight like a crystal bell. These simple covers, made of glass, ceramic, or later even repurposed jars and jugs, acted as miniature greenhouses, protecting delicate seedlings from frost, wind, and hungry pests. For early gardeners, cloches were the difference between failure and abundance, allowing them to plant weeks ahead of the season. Underneath their shelter, lettuce could defy snow, herbs could overwinter, and young tomato plants could stretch toward the sun long before the soil had truly warmed. Walking through a garden lined with cloches must have felt like stepping into a magical world, tiny sanctuaries where life pushed forward despite the elements. Today, with all our modern plastics and row covers, the old charm of a glass cloche still holds something special. It's a reminder that protection doesn't have to be complicated, that even the smallest gestures, like placing a cover over a fragile seedling, can give life the chance to thrive against the odds. 11. Compost teas, the potent brew of life for the garden. From the delicate glass domes of cloches, we move into something far less glamorous, yet just as essential: the bubbling buckets of compost tea. In old gardens, this wasn't a drink for people, but a tonic for plants, made by steeping comfrey leaves, nettles, or even fish scraps in water, until the mixture transformed into a dark, pungent brew. To neighbors, it may have smelled like a swamp, but to gardeners, it was liquid gold. They knew this humble potion could bring tired soil back to life, strengthen roots, and send vegetables shooting skyward with vigor. Each recipe was different: nettles to fuel leafy greens, comfrey for blossoms, fish for an extra punch of protein. But the principle was the same: nature providing for itself in a never-ending cycle. Gardeners swore by it, even when friends wrinkled their noses at the smell. And today, as we learn more about soil microbes and organic practices, science is proving what they always knew: that this messy, homemade fertilizer was brimming with nutrients and living organisms that kept gardens thriving. Compost tea is more than just a forgotten trick. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful solutions come from embracing the raw, untamed processes of the earth. 12. Onion braids preservation. Woven with pride. From the bubbling buckets of compost tea, let's step into the warmth of a farmhouse kitchen, where harvest wasn't just stored, it was displayed with care. Hanging from rafters or pantry beams were braids of onions, long, twisting ropes that turned humble vegetables into rustic works of art. Creating them was part function, part ceremony. Gardeners would choose the firmest bulbs, weaving their dried tops into intricate patterns, layer upon layer, until dozens of onions hung together like golden chandeliers. Beyond their beauty, the braids had a purpose. Air could circulate freely, helping the onions last through the winter, while any softening bulb was easy to spot and remove. For families, these braids weren't just food storage. They were a visible symbol of self-reliance, a whisper that said, "Someone here knows how to grow and how to keep." Imagine walking into a kitchen where amber, purple, and red onions glowed in the light, each one representing hours of labor and months of nourishment ahead. In today's world of mesh bags and plastic bins, onion braiding may seem unnecessary, yet it offers something modern storage never can: the quiet pride of craftsmanship woven into everyday life. 13. Heritage strawberry sweetness lost to time. From the rustic beauty of onion braids, we wander into the sunlit corners of old gardens, where strawberries once sprawled like living carpets. These weren't the oversized, watery berries stacked neatly in plastic cartons at today's supermarkets. Heritage strawberries were smaller, softer, often so delicate they barely survived a day after picking. But what they lacked in durability, they made up for in flavor. Bursts of sweetness and tang so intense, they tasted like summer itself. Families would let the plants run wild, sending out runners that rooted wherever they touched the soil, transforming tidy garden beds into lush, fruit-studded patches. For children, these patches were treasure hunts, each ripe berry hidden under leaves like a secret waiting to be discovered, each bite staining lips and fingers with the taste of joy. They weren't grown for commerce, they were grown for memory, for moments shared on warm afternoons, for pies cooling on windowsills. Today, when so much of our food is bred for transport and shelf life, heritage strawberries remind us what's been lost: flavor, intimacy, and the simple wonder of eating something sun-warmed, fresh from the vine, as if the garden itself had handed you a gift. Teen, herb drying bundles, capturing the essence of summer. From the sweetness of strawberries, let's move into the fragrant corners of old kitchens, where herbs once hung in tidy bundles from rafters and beams. Sage, thyme, oregano, rosemary, each tied with twine and suspended upside down, transforming kitchens and pantries into living spice cabinets. This wasn't just decoration, it was preservation, a way of carrying summer's essence into the long, cold months when gardens slept. The process was simple but sacred. Harvest in the morning just before flowering, bind the stems in small bunches, then hang them in cool, shaded spaces until their oils were locked in and their flavors intensified. Families relied on these herbs not only to season stews and roasts, but also for teas, tonics, and home remedies, traditions rooted in both necessity and care. Imagine stepping into a farmhouse kitchen where the air itself carried the memory of summer. Sharp rosemary, earthy sage, sweet oregano mingling together in a tapestry of scent. In today's world of store-bought dinners, we've almost forgotten that herbs could be both medicine and memory, both flavor and ritual. Hanging bundles may seem old-fashioned, yet they remind us that the simplest acts can keep seasons alive long after they've passed. 15. Garden generosity. When abundance was meant to be shared. From the quiet fragrance of drying herbs, we move into a tradition that spoke not just of gardening, but of community, the practice of sharing the harvest. Every summer, there came a point when gardens overflowed. Zucchini grew faster than families could cook it. Tomatoes ripened by the basket. Beans filled jars to the brim. Instead of letting food spoil, neighbors packed their extras into baskets and left them on doorsteps, sometimes with handwritten notes, sometimes with nothing but goodwill. Seeds, recipes, and gardening wisdom were exchanged just as freely, passed hand to hand like gifts of the season. Children carried baskets to elderly neighbors, and in return they might receive a jar of peaches, a handful of corn, or simply a story about how things used to be. This wasn't commerce, it was trust, connection, and continuity. In fact, many heirloom varieties survived only because seeds were saved and shared across fences and generations. Today, when our lives often feel isolated and fast-paced, the generosity of these older gardens reminds us of something vital. That abundance means little if it isn't shared. A garden, after all, grows more than food. It grows community, kindness, and the bonds that last long after the harvest is done. 16. Forgotten water features. Wells, pumps, and rain barrels of the past. From the generosity of neighbors sharing baskets of produce, we arrive at one final tradition, one that quenched both people and plants. Forgotten water features. Long before hoses and sprinklers, backyards often held hand pumps, cisterns, or simple rain barrels tucked beneath the eaves. These were not just practical tools, but lifelines, collecting and storing the rain that fell freely from the sky. Families filled watering cans from wooden barrels. Children played at the pump handle, and every drop was valued. In drought or dry spells, these systems meant the difference between thriving crops and withering vines. Beyond utility, they created moments of connection. A grandfather teaching his grandchild how to prime the pump, or neighbors drawing from the same well. Today, as water scarcity once again challenges communities, these old features remind us of a wisdom we abandoned too quickly, that nature already provides, if only we're willing to gather and save. Reviving rainwater harvesting and simple backyard storage isn't just nostalgic. It's a return to respect for one of our most precious resources. In the quiet ripple of a barrel filled with rain, there's a memory of the past and a guide for the future. Why these traditions still matter today. And so, from bean teepees to rain barrels, from root cellars to rhubarb patches, we've walked through a world of garden traditions that once shaped daily life across America. These weren't just clever tricks or quaint relics. They were practices born out of necessity, creativity, and deep respect for the land. They fed families when store shelves were bare, connected neighbors in times of hardship, and left legacies that stretched across generations. What strikes me most is how much heart lived in those gardens. They were places of play, of patience, of generosity, and of memory. In today's fast digital age, perhaps what we're truly longing for is that slower rhythm, where growth takes time, and where the garden is more than food. It's a teacher, a companion, a reminder of who we are when we live close to the earth. So now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these forgotten traditions spoke to you the most? Have you tried reviving any of them in your own backyard, or even with your indoor plants? Share your stories in the comments. I read every one, and your experiences inspire this community more than you know. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Earthly Delights, where together we keep these old traditions alive and reimagine them for today. Because in every garden, past and present, there's always a story waiting to be told.